The boy was already asleep when I found him. He lay curled against the blackened foundation of what had been, yesterday, maybe the day before, someone's kitchen. The stone still held warmth from the fire that had consumed everything above it. His small body rose and fell with each breath, and in that rhythm was something I couldn't name then, something that felt like surrender. It was September 1944. The village was called Oradour-sur-Glane, though what remained hardly deserved a name. We'd arrived 3 hours after the SS had left, and the smoke still climbed in gray columns against an autumn sky too beautiful for what lay beneath it. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. American guns pushing east, German guns answering. Between those sounds, the silence of this place felt heavier than any bombardment. I was Corporal James Mitchell, Canadian 2nd Infantry Division, and I'd seen bombed-out villages before. I'd walked through streets where walls stood without roofs, where photographs fluttered in door frames that led to nothing. But this was different. This wasn't collateral damage. This was deliberate. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. His hair was dark with ash, his face streaked where tears had carved channels through the soot. One hand clutched a piece of fabric, blue gingham, the kind you'd use for kitchen curtains or a summer dress. The other hand lay open, palm up, as if he'd been reaching for something in his sleep. I knelt beside him, and that's when I saw his feet. They were bare, cut and blistered, the kind of wounds you get from running on broken things, from running and not stopping, from running until running becomes impossible and sleep becomes the only mercy left. "Poor kid's been out here all night," whispered Private Edwards beside me. His voice cracked on the last word. Edwards was 19 and still believed the war would end with ticker tape parades and girls throwing flowers. He didn't understand yet that some things don't survive, even when the body does. I reached out slowly, carefully, the way you'd approach something wild and wounded. My hand hovered above the boy's shoulder. Around us, the morning light revealed more of what this village had become. A cemetery without markers, a story with all its pages burned. The boy's eyes opened. They were brown, but not the brown of earth or wood. They were brown like rust, like something that had oxidized, changed fundamentally by exposure to elements it was never meant to endure. He looked at me without surprise, without fear. He looked at me the way soldiers looked at each other after 3 days of shelling, like nothing could matter anymore because everything already had. "Do you speak English?" I asked, though I knew it was foolish. We were in France. The boy was French, but shock makes us grasp at familiar things. He said nothing, just stared. Edwards shifted nervously. There must be someone. Family. Survivors. I wanted to tell him what we both already knew, that the smoke rising from the church had come from bodies, not pews, that the German report we'd intercepted had numbered the dead at 642, that in a village this small, everyone was family. Instead, I pulled a chocolate bar from my pack. It was melted, misshapen, but the boy's eyes tracked it with an intensity that made my chest tight. I unwrapped it slowly, placed it in his open palm. His fingers closed around it, but he didn't eat. Just held it, like maybe if he didn't eat it, this moment wouldn't be real. Like maybe he could still be wherever he was before the world ended. "What's your name?" I tried in French this time, my accent making the words clumsy. His lips moved. No sound came out at first, just air shaped by a mouth that had forgotten how to form words meant for living people. Then, barely audible, "Henri." Behind us, Lieutenant Morrison was shouting orders. Secure the perimeter, document the scene, search for survivors. The words felt obscene in this place where survival itself seemed like a violation of something sacred. Henri looked past me, toward the ruins of what I'd later learn had been the school. His eyes held a question I couldn't answer, though I understood it perfectly. That was the last morning any of us believed the war was just about territory. We found 3 others that day, a woman who wouldn't stop screaming, an old man with eyes that saw nothing, and a girl of maybe 13 who whispered prayers in Latin until her voice gave out. But Henri was the youngest. Henri was the one who made even the veterans turn away. The medic, a tough-faced sergeant named O'Brien, who'd been in since North Africa, examined Henri with hands that trembled. "No major injuries," he said. And the words sounded like an accusation. "Physically, he's fine." We both knew fine was a lie. The regiment was moving out the next morning. Orders to push toward the German border, to maintain momentum while they were retreating. There were protocols for this, procedures for civilian casualties and orphaned children. The Red Cross would come. They'd take Henri to a processing center, then to an orphanage. Then what? What happened to a child after you burned away everyone he loved? That night, I sat against a half-collapsed wall while Henri slept nearby, wrapped in my spare blanket. Edwards was on first watch. Morrison had taken the survivors to the temporary aid station 3 kilometers south. I had one job: stay with the boy until morning, then hand him off to someone with the authority to decide his future. I thought about my own son. Thomas was 7, just a year older than Henri. Before I'd shipped out, he'd cried and asked when I was coming home. I'd promised him by Christmas. That was 2 Christmases ago. Now I wrote letters saying soon, and wondering if he'd even recognize me when I finally walked through that door in Toronto. If I walked through that door. Henri stirred in his sleep, whimpering. I moved closer, and that's when I saw he was still clutching that piece of blue fabric. In the moonlight, I could make out what it was. Part of a child's dress, small enough for a toddler. The edge was scorched black. Memory seized me. 3 weeks earlier, we'd liberated a town called Falaise. A French woman there had kissed my hands, crying, thanking us in broken English. She'd had 2 daughters, she said. The Germans had taken the eldest, 15, away in a truck. The youngest, 3, had died in the bombardment when we'd shelled the German positions. You are heroes, she'd told us. And I'd wanted to explain that heroes don't create the circumstances that require gratitude for mere survival. But she was already walking away, and I was already forgetting her face. I couldn't forget Henri's. Corporal? Edwards appeared, his silhouette framed by stars. Your watch, I stood, joints protesting. At 32, I was already ancient by infantry standards. You wake up? No, just, he's been making these sounds. Not crying exactly, just, Edwards trailed off, unable to find words for a grief that had bypassed language entirely. I took my position, rifle across my knees, and watched the darkness between ruined buildings. The Germans were gone, but old habits die hard. You always watch. You always listen. You never let yourself believe you're safe. Henri's breathing changed. I turned to see him sitting up, staring at me with those rust-colored eyes. Je veux ma maman, he whispered. I want my mother. The words were small stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward until they touched everything. I'd been in combat for 18 months. I'd seen men die screaming. I'd shot enemy soldiers who looked young enough to be in school. I'd walked through cities reduced to rubble and learned to eat my rations while the smell of death hung in the air. None of it had prepared me for this. I know, I said in French, and even as I said it, I hated myself for the inadequacy of those words, for the way they acknowledged his loss while offering nothing to fill the void it created. He clutched the blue fabric tighter. Ma petite sœur, Marie, elle avait 3 ans. My little sister, Marie. She was 3. Past tense. He'd already learned to speak of her in past tense. I wanted to tell him it would be okay. That time heals. That he'd grow up and fall in love and have children of his own, and the pain would fade into something manageable. But I'd learned in this war that some lies are too heavy to carry, even when we tell them with good intentions. So instead, I moved beside him and sat. Just sat. And when he leaned against me, his small body shaking with sobs that made no sound, I put my arm around him and let him break. The stars wheeled overhead. The artillery rumbled. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, Henri fell back asleep against my shoulder. Morrison gave me the order at 600 hours. The Red Cross convoy arrives at 1400. You'll escort Henri to the collection point at Limoges. That's 30 kilometers south. You'll take one of the supply trucks heading back for resupply. Be back by nightfall. We move out at dawn tomorrow. It should have been simple. A few hours drive, hand the boy over to people trained for this, return to my unit. But as I watched Henri eat his breakfast, hardtack and tinned meat, which he consumed mechanically without interest, I felt something twist in my chest. The truck ride was silent. Henri sat beside me in the cab, staring out at the French countryside rolling past. It was beautiful, which felt like an insult. Fields of late-season wheat, farmhouses with smoke rising from chimneys, a woman hanging laundry, white sheets bright against the September sky. The world continuing as if children weren't sleeping beside ruins. Halfway there, we passed a German cemetery. Hastily dug graves marked with crooked crosses, names and dates scrawled in fading paint. Our driver, a Quebecois corporal named Benoit, spat out the window. Should have left them for the crows, he muttered. I thought about that. About the young German soldier I'd shot outside Caen, who'd looked maybe 17. About how he'd called for his mother in those last seconds. The same words in German that Henri had whispered in French. About how easy it was to hate an army, and how hard it was to hate a boy bleeding out in a ditch. Henri pressed his hand against the window, leaving a small print on the glass. He was watching the cemetery disappear behind us. "Où mon papa? Where is my father?" The question hung in the air between us. Benoit glanced at me, then back at the road. I'd been avoiding this, letting Henri believe in maybes, in possibilities, in the chance that someone had survived. But children are smarter than we give them credit for. They know when adults are lying, even by omission. "I don't know," I said, and it was true. The SS hadn't left records of who'd been locked in the church, who'd been shot in the streets, who'd been burned alive in the barns. We had numbers, 642 dead, but not names. Not yet. But I think he would want you to be somewhere safe. Henri nodded slowly, as if he'd expected this answer, as if he'd already known and had only asked to confirm the truth he'd been carrying alone. The collection point was an old monastery converted into a processing center. White tents on brown grass, children sitting in rows, tagged with numbers, Red Cross workers moving between them with clipboards, recording histories that could be summarized in a single line. No surviving family. I carried Henri through the gates, his weight, almost nothing in my arms. A woman in a nurse's uniform approached, middle-aged, efficient, with eyes that had seen this too many times. "Name?" she asked in French. "Henri." I realized I didn't know his last name. In all our hours together, I'd never asked. "Just Henri, from Oradour-sur-Glane." She wrote it down, gestured to a tent. "Leave him there. We'll process him with the others." Process, like he was paperwork. Like you could file away his grief and stamp it with an official seal and move on to the next case. I set Henri down. He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw understanding. He knew I was leaving. He knew I had to. He knew, with the strange wisdom of children who've seen too much, that nothing lasts. That everyone leaves. That the world is a place where you wake up one morning with a family and go to sleep that night with ashes. I crouched down to his level. "Henri, these people, they'll take care of you. They'll find you a place to stay. With other children. You won't be alone." He didn't cry. He just nodded, clutching that piece of blue fabric from his sister's dress. "Can I swallowed hard. "Can I write to you? Would you like that?" For the first time since I'd found him, something flickered in those rust-brown eyes. Not hope exactly. More like the memory of what hope used to feel like. "Oui," he whispered. I pulled out my notebook, tore out a page, wrote my name and regiment and service number, folded it and tucked it into his pocket. "You keep that safe. And when you're ready, when you learn to write, you send me a letter. Tell me how you're doing." "D'accord?" "D'accord." I stood. Every instinct screamed at me to stay, to refuse the order, to find some way to keep this child from becoming just another number in a system designed to manage tragedy at scale. But I was a corporal in the Canadian Army, and we were fighting a war, and there were thousands more like Henri scattered across Europe. I couldn't save them all. I couldn't even save one. As I walked back to the truck, I heard the nurse calling to Henri in that bright, false voice adults use with traumatized children. I heard other children crying, calling for parents who would never answer. I heard Benoit starting the engine, the mechanical sound somehow obscene in its normalcy. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I might not leave. That night, lying in my bedroll under stars that cared nothing for human suffering, I thought about Thomas in Toronto, about how I'd promised to come home, about how Henri's father had probably promised the same thing, to come home from whatever he'd been doing that morning, to have lunch, to play with his children, to be there. Promises are the first casualties of war. We pushed into Germany in October. The weather turned cold, rain mixing with the first hints of snow. We fought through the Siegfried Line, taking bunkers and pillboxes, losing men to mines and mortars and the grinding attrition of advance-by-inches warfare. I kept thinking about Henri. At night, when I closed my eyes, I saw him curled against those ruins. During the day, when we cleared villages and found civilians huddled in cellars, I looked at the children and wondered if they'd survive what we were putting them through. Liberation, we called it. As if freedom delivered by artillery was somehow less traumatic than occupation. In November, we took a town called Geilenkirchen. The fighting was brutal. House to house, room to room, the kind of combat where you shoot first at sounds and worry about what you've killed only after. We lost Edwards on the third day. Sniper got him while he was helping an old German woman out of a collapsed cellar. He'd been trying to do something good in the middle of all this horror. It hadn't mattered. Morrison became more withdrawn after that, smoking endless cigarettes and staring at maps as if they held answers to questions he couldn't articulate. O'Brien drank when he could get it, which was often. Medics could trade medical supplies for almost anything. Even Benoit, who'd joked through France, went quiet. We were wearing down, all of us. The war wasn't over, but something in us was ending. I received my first letter in December. It came with a batch of mail that had been following our unit for weeks, redirected through 3 different command posts. The envelope was small, the handwriting careful but childish. Large letters, uneven spacing, the work of someone still learning to shape thoughts into words. Cher Monsieur Mitchell, the sisters say I should write. They say you wanted to know how I am. I am learning English now. I am in a house with other children. Some of them are from Oradour too. We don't talk about it. I have bad dreams. The sisters say that's normal. They say I'm safe now. But I don't think I believe in safe anymore. I still have Marie's dress. They wanted me to throw it away, but I said no. Is that okay, to keep it? I think about my papa. I think about how he always smelled like tobacco and wood smoke. I think about how Maman would sing when she made dinner. I try to remember, but sometimes I can't hear the song anymore, and that scares me. Are you safe? Please be safe. Henri, I read it 17 times. I counted. Morrison found me sitting against a half-track, the letter in my hands, tears freezing on my face in the December cold. Bad news from home? He asked, sitting beside me. No, just a boy I met, back in France. I told him about Henri, about Oradour-sur-Glane, about rust-brown eyes and a piece of blue fabric and the weight of promises we can't keep. Morrison listened without interrupting, smoking his cigarette down to the filter. You going to write back? He finally asked. I don't know what to say. Say something true. That night, by candlelight in a bombed-out house that smelled of cordite and rot, I wrote back. Dear Henri, of course you can keep your sister's dress. Never let anyone tell you what you're allowed to remember. I have bad dreams too. Most of the soldiers here do. We don't talk about it either, but maybe that's the wrong choice. Maybe we should talk about the things that hurt. Maybe that's how we survive them. I can't promise I'll always be safe, but I can promise I'll try. I can promise I'll do my best to come home. And I can promise that as long as I'm alive, you won't be forgotten. Your friend, James Mitchell. I sent it the next morning. 3 days later, we were back in heavy combat, and I stopped thinking about anything except staying alive. The war ended in May 1945. I was in Czechoslovakia when we got the news. Germany had surrendered, Hitler was dead. It was over. Men wept, men shouted. Men fired their weapons into the air in celebration. I sat on the steps of a liberated concentration camp and felt nothing but exhaustion. We'd won. But the cost was written in cities reduced to rubble, in mass graves, in children who'd learned to stop asking where their parents were. Victory felt like a word from another language. One I no longer spoke. I shipped home in June. The crossing took 2 weeks, and I spent most of it staring at the ocean, trying to remember who I'd been before the war. That young father who'd kissed his son goodbye and promised to be back by Christmas. He seemed like a stranger now, like someone who'd believed the world made sense. Thomas met me at the station in Toronto. He was 9 now, taller, with my wife's eyes and a hesitation in his smile that gutted me. I was a stranger to him. A man who looked like his father but smelled wrong, moved wrong. Had eyes that saw past him to places he'd never been and couldn't imagine. We learned each other slowly. I taught him to fish. He taught me about the life he'd lived while I was gone. The school plays I'd missed, the friends he'd made, the small victories and defeats of childhood that I'd sacrificed on the altar of the greater good. My wife, Sarah, watched us both with worried eyes, seeing the fractures in our family and trying to paste them over with normalcy. At night, I still dreamed of Henri, of rust-brown eyes and blue fabric and ruins that held warmth. I'd wake up sweating, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there, listening for artillery that had fallen silent. Henri's letters came regularly, once a month, sometimes more. He was in school now, learning English and mathematics and all the things children learn when they're building a future from the ruins of their past. He never mentioned his family except in past tense. My father used to, my mother would. Marie liked. The wound was there in every sentence, even the hopeful ones. In 1946, he wrote that he'd been adopted by a couple in Lyon. They're kind, he wrote. They try. But sometimes I wake up and forget where I am, and I think I'm back there, sleeping beside the foundation, and you're about to find me. In 1948, he sent a photograph. A thin teenager with serious eyes, standing in front of a school, wearing a suit that was slightly too large. On the back, he'd written, "I'm going to be a teacher. I want to help children who've lost things. Is that stupid?" I wrote back immediately. It's the least stupid thing I've ever heard. The years passed. Thomas grew up, went to university, got married. I became a grandfather. The war receded into history, into memorial services and veterans' dinners and speeches about sacrifice that never quite captured what we'd actually sacrificed. Sarah and I grew old together, and slowly, Carefully, I learned how to live with the ghosts I'd brought home. Henri and I never met again, but the letters continued. Through decades, through his marriage, through the birth of his own children. He named his daughter Marie. I want her to know who came before, he wrote. I want my sister to live in more than just a piece of burned fabric. In 1989, I received a letter that stopped me cold. Dear James, I'm taking my children to Oradour-sur-Glane tomorrow. They've preserved it, left the ruins standing as a memorial. I haven't been back since the day you found me. I don't know if I can do this, but I need them to understand. I need them to see where they come from, not just the destruction, but the survival. Not just what was taken, but what endured. Will you think of me tomorrow? Will you remember a small boy who slept beside ruins because he had nowhere else to go? And will you remember, too, that he survived? That he built a life from ashes? That love can grow even in soil poisoned by hate. You saved me, James. Not from death. I was never going to die that day. You saved me from forgetting that someone cared. That in the middle of all that horror, a stranger stopped and said, "You matter." Thank you. For 45 years, thank you. Henri, I read that letter to Thomas and his children. I told them about the war, not the sanitized version we told in public, but the real one. The one with rust-brown eyes and blue fabric and the weight of impossible choices. The one where victory and tragedy were so tangled together you couldn't separate them. Did you ever stop having nightmares, Grandpa? My oldest granddaughter asked. She was 7, the age Henri had been when I found him. No, I said, because some lies are too heavy to carry. But I learned to wake up from them, and that's its own kind of victory. I'm 92 now. The war is ancient history to most people. Something in textbooks, black and white photographs, statistics that mean nothing until you add faces to them. Henri is gone. He died 5 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carry Marie's name forward. But I still see him sometimes. That small boy in the ruins, and I wonder about all the Henris we walked past, all the children we couldn't save, all the promises we broke in the name of winning. The war ended, but the children remember. They remember, and they carry it forward, and they teach their children, and that's how we make sure it matters. That's how we turn ruins into foundations for something better. That's how we survive. Who would you wait for at a train station, even after the war ends? Who would you write letters to for 45 years just to prove they matter? If this story touched something in you, if it made you remember that history is made of people, not statistics, share it. Let Henri's memory live. Let all the Henris live in the only way left to them now, in our refusal to forget.